And it's just to summarize it as I like doing at the start, it's pretty much an insight of David, or like he prophesied, you could say, a quote unquote, almost like a conversation between God and Christ, right? Like so God the Father and God the Son. So this time I'm just going to read the whole psalm actually, and then I'll get started through that. So in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord shall send the rods of your strength out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power, in the beauties of holiness. From the womb of the morning you have the dew of youth. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are priests forever according to the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He shall execute kings in the day of his wrath. He shall judge among the nations. He shall fill the places with dead bodies. He shall execute the heads of many countries. He shall drink of the brook by the wayside. Therefore, he shall lift up the head. Okay, so not very long. We're going to start with verse 1 and 2. So I think a lot of us maybe have seen, especially the first verse. So the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. So this is actually referenced in other parts of the Bible. All right. So in the New Testament as well, Christ himself, he references that part as well. So the Lord said to my Lord. When I've seen this like verse before, like floating around, I was like, I never really understood how does the Lord say to my Lord? Who's the first Lord and who's the second Lord? So the first Lord is actually God the Father, and the second Lord, so my Lord, is God the Son. Now, in some other translations, or not translation, other versions, the first Lord is actually in all caps, so that kind of means God the Father. And even if you just use like a bit of logic, which I didn't use at the time, like King David, there's no one on earth at the time who's like a higher rank, right, than King David. So, King David, through his prophecy, he would know that his Lord is Christ. So, a Lord saying to my Lord is like God the Father saying to God the Son. So, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. His enemies, obviously, Christ also has enemies, quote unquote. It's the people who fight against him, right? And the people who fight against his people, the people who, who go against his words or try to rebel, like Satan, for example. And when we also go against Christ, or when we sin, we don't do the right thing, we also fight somewhat against God, against Christ. Verse 2 goes, the Lord shall send the rods of your strength out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. So, like, just to show like the power or the magnitude of his rule, it goes out of Zion. So it goes from, out of Israel to the whole world, pretty much. So he will rule over the good and the bad. Moving on to verse 3, your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power. I think the words volunteers here is a bit important in my opinion. Just to start off, actually, the word power, verse 3. Yeah, in the day of your power. So just the first half of verse 3. Power, they said from, in Hebrew, it's like kind of like army. So army or like group of people. So I think the word volunteers here is a bit important, because I think a volunteer is different to someone who's been hired, right? A volunteer is someone who does out of will, maybe out of love, like it could be anything, like whatever it may be. Like the bottom line is they're willing, right? They want to do it. Rather than someone who's hired, right? Someone who's hired, if the going gets tough, they don't get going. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, okay. So if you're someone who's getting hired, right? If let's say your workplace, goes on fire, you don't really care, right? To some extent. But if you're like a volunteer, right? If you visit the sick, or if you help the poor, you check up on them. Even their stories you'd want to hear. Or if the place, touch wood goes on fire, you'd be spewing, right? You'd be upset. So it's important for us to be a volunteer rather than a mercenary, you could say. So like, it's good for us to think to ourselves, am I a volunteer, right? You need to make sure you're a volunteer. Just the second half of verse 3. So in the beauties of holiness, from the womb of the morning, you have the dew of your youth. So this kind of saying that the youth, so the people who get attracted, so we get attracted to Christ through the beauty of his holiness, right? And such people are like the youth. So the early Jew, okay, and they're saying there was like a few contemplations, right? There's a lot of Jew. So a lot of the youth are generally get attracted to Christ, and it starts in the beginning of their lives. So it's very important. Yeah, so as I was saying, the age of the youth is what gets attracted. So you could say maybe when you're like a child, you're not really you have no clue what's going on. Because, or some people, some children are really gifted, they feel very attracted. And it kind of goes up. When you get a bit older, you can't understand a bit more and you get attracted, right? And from there, it kind of goes on. So that's what they mean. Now, verse 4 to 6. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are priests forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So we know that Christ, right? Christ is considered as a priest. He was ordained. He did take the burden of our sins, so he became like a mediator between, when he died, between us and God the Father. And saying his priesthood will last forever. So I think we know the verse, Jesus Christ is the same as yesterday, today, and forever. So that's in Hebrews chapter 13. So he will last forever. And the order is of Melchizedek. So it says like Melchizedek rather than someone like Aaron, because Melchizedek came before Aaron, right? He dealt with Abraham. So his one is more grave, right? It's like of a higher rank. And they say that he's a priest upon his throne. So that suits Christ a lot more than someone of Aaron. Verse 6, he shall judge among the nations. He shall think of the brook by the wayside. Therefore he shall lift up the head. Matthew Henry's one, he said he speaks more about like the suffering of Christ, right? So in John chapter 18, before he got arrested, right? Him and his disciples, they crossed a brook of Kidron, right? And that's where he got arrested through the betrayal of Judas. Now, another one was saying he was like him like drinking water during battle or like something refreshing. I didn't read so much on it, but I think this one makes a lot more sense. And the last part, therefore he shall lift up the head. So the verse 7 here, it speaks about the suffering and then his victory. So when Christ died, we know it's written that he said he bowed his head, right, when he passed, when he gave up the spirit. But after 3 days, he raises up his head and he raised us up with him, our heads up with him. That's it. Glory be to God for me.
Thank you, Mina. So once again, thank you all for coming on another fine Monday evening. So today we're going to do things a little bit differently. And unfortunately for you, the speaker that I had tentatively booked decided to let me know that he can't make it. So you're stuck with me today, and I pray that you guys don't stumble because of my weakness. What's going to happen today is 3 things. Firstly, at the end of every book, we do a Kahoot. That will happen at the end of today. So we'll do a Kahoot on the last 20 chapters of Exodus. And as usual, there'll be 3 prizes for the top 3 places. There's an icon up for grabs, a spiritual book, and a gift card. And first place gets to decide what they want. Second place gets to decide what they want out of what's left. And then third place just takes the third remaining prize. But that'll happen later down the track. What's going to happen now is we're going to do a review on Corinthians. And the reason we're doing a review on First Corinthians is because we're going to study 2 Corinthians from next week. And we studied 1 Corinthians back in, I think, 2019. So it's been a while. It's been a long while since we've done it. So just for those of who have attended and it's been a while, or haven't read it, or have read it and it's been ages, we're just going to do a quick review. And unfortunately, you guys are stuck with me in terms of that review. What we're going to do in terms of that review is, have you guys seen Bible Project? Well, if you haven't, you're going to see it today. It's wonderful. It is a way that you'll see, but they just visually give you a summary that's easy to understand on the whole book. We'll watch that. Hopefully it works. About 10, 15 more minutes, and then we'll get started with the Kahoot. Are you guys praying?
And a whole bunch of people became followers of Jesus.
Let's start that again.
Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, written to a church community that Paul knew really well. Corinth was a major port city in the ancient world and had temples to Greek and Roman gods. It was a big economic center. And so Paul strategically came here as a missionary. He spent a year and a half there getting to know people, talking to them about Jesus. And a whole bunch of people became followers of Jesus and formed a church community. You can read about all of this in Acts chapter 18. So after a while, Paul moved on to start churches in other cities, and he started getting reports that things were not going well at all back in the church in Corinth. It was plagued by all kinds of problems. And that's why he wrote this letter. It's broken up into 5 main parts along with the final greeting. And these 5 sections correspond to 5 main problems that Paul is addressing. So the letter reads like a collection of short essays on different topics, but there are these core ideas that unite all of the pieces together. So here's what he does in each section. He describes the problem, but then he always responds to that problem with some part of the story of the gospel, which is the good news about Jesus. And he shows how they're actually not living out what they say they believe. And so this letter is all about learning to think about every area of life through the lens of the gospel. So let's dive in and see how he does it. In chapters 1 through 4, the problem is that there are these divisions in the church. There's some other teachers who had come through town since Paul left, a guy named Apollos and Peter, and people had picked their favorite teacher and then became groupies around that leader, and then started to talk bad and disrespect people who favored another leader or teacher. And so Paul, his response to this kind of sarcastic and sharp. He says, you have to be kidding me. The church is not a popularity contest. The church is a community of people who are centered around Jesus. Its leaders and its teachers are simply servants of Jesus. So while you might prefer one leader more than another, it's not worth dividing over. It's certainly not speaking poorly about each other. The center of the church is Jesus and the good news about who he is and what he's done. In chapters 5 through 7, Paul addresses some problems related to sex. There were a number of people sleeping around in the church. One guy with his stepmother. A number of other people still worshiping at the local temples to Greek gods and sleeping with the prostitutes who worked. Not only that, but there were people in the church who were saying that this was all just fine. They said, hey, we're free in Christ. God's grace is bottomless, right? It's fine. Paul says it's not fine. And with the gospel in hand, he shows just how wrong-headed this kind of thinking is. He says, remember, first of all, Jesus died for your sins, including the ruin of broken relationships caused by sexual misconduct. And so, if you're a Christian, sexual integrity is one of the main ways that we respond to Jesus' love and grace. Paul also reminds us that just as Jesus was physically raised from the dead, so our bodies will be raised from the dead. Which means this: if your body is being redeemed by Jesus now and in the future, then what you do with your body matters. It matters a lot. And it's not yours to do whatever you want. Paul's being super clear. Being a follower of Jesus involves no compromise when it comes to sexual integrity. In chapters 8 through 10, the issue is about food, but not just food preferences, like do you like or dislike certain food. The issue the Corinthians were divided over is meat that came from animals sacrificed in the local temples to Greek and Roman gods. And there was a split between Jewish and non-Jewish Christians about how to respond to this issue. Once again, Paul appeals to some core ideas from the gospel. He says our allegiance, first and foremost, is to Jesus as Lord, not to any other god. And so if you're in a situation where there's meat that's been dedicated to another god, and there are people around who might watch you and look, hey, Christians worship Jesus, and they can worship other gods too. Paul says if that's the scenario, don't eat the meat. Your loyalty is to Jesus, and you should love those people more than yourself and not mislead them. But Paul quickly qualifies this and says, as Christians, we believe God is the creator of all things, including that animal. And the devil idols, we believe, are just pieces of wood and stone. So if there's no one around who's going to misunderstand your actions and you're hungry, eat out. You're free as a new human in Christ to follow your conscience. So what makes it okay in one situation to eat but not in the other? The core principle is love. Love will deny itself and look out for the well-being of other people. And love, God's love, is at the core of the gospel. It's what Jesus did when he died for us, and so Paul says it's what Christians should do for us. In chapters 11 through 14, Paul moves on and addresses problems in their weekly worship gathering. There were some people who were having really powerful spiritual experiences in the gathering, and so they would start praying out loud in unknown language. There were other people who might start sharing teaching or a word from God, and then someone would get up and interrupt them because they wanted to share. And it all was really chaotic, and it was distracting people, especially visitors, from hearing the gospel. So in these chapters, Paul helps them think, first of all, about the purpose of this gathering, and help them see what kind of behaviors are appropriate. He says the gathering is a place where God's Spirit should be working through everybody, and it should happen in a unified way. So he develops this cool metaphor about the church as a human body. It's one, but it has all these serves a unique and important role. So he goes on to name a whole bunch of things that the Spirit does through all these different people, all for the building up of the church. It's a key phrase in this chapter. And Paul concludes that the highest value in the gathering should be a concept central to the gospel: God's love. Love is a key word in this chapter. Love will compel each person in the gathering to use their role to serve and seek the well-being of others. So Paul applies all this to the Corinthian crowd. Some people think the purpose of the gathering is to have intense spiritual experiences, to get a chance to speak their mind. And Paul says, listen, I'm a big fan of powerful experiences, but if it distracts other people or freaks them out, I'm loving myself more than I'm loving other people. The gathering around Jesus should be orderly, so everybody can learn and sing and worship and hear God speaking to them. The last problem Paul addresses is the issue of Jesus' resurrection and the future hope of Jesus' fall. There were some people in the church who were saying that the idea of resurrection is ridiculous and doesn't really matter to a Christian. And Paul reacts to this big time. He begins by saying that the resurrection is an indispensable part of the gospel. We believe in it because of the hundreds of eyewitnesses that saw Jesus alive in a physical body after being publicly executed by Rome. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Paul says, then his death was meaningless. We are all still lost in our sin and selfishness. We should just stop being Christians. Paul then shows in detail how the resurrection was Jesus' victory over death and evil, how it's a source of life and power for us now and present, and how it's a promise of future hope for the whole world. It's because of the resurrection that we have a reason to be unified around Jesus. It's the reason we have motivation for sexual integrity. It's the source of power for loving other people more than ourselves. Ultimately, it's our hope for victory over death. And so, Paul concludes, we do believe Jesus was raised from the dead, which means this: the gospel is not just moral advice or a recipe for private spirituality. It's an announcement about Jesus that opens up a whole new reality. And that's what 1 Corinthians is all about: seeing every part of life through the lens of that gospel.
How great is that? Yeah. I don't know. I'm just obsessed with these videos. I'm obsessed with this guy's voice as well. But getting on to the quick summary, just a bit of context that he doesn't really mention in this. Does anybody know where the city of Corinth is? Okay, so the city of Corinth is in Greece. It's a city that is like a port city. It's on the water, and it was used as like a port. So there was a lot of people coming in and out. Majority of the people that you would see in Corinth would be the Greeks, the Romans, and the Egyptians, coming in, trading, and conducting whatnot. Now, Corinth had this reputation. It was a pretty bad reputation because, as you saw in the video, there was a bunch of pagan temples. One of the main temples there was the temple of Aphrodite, who's the temple of, who's the goddess of fertility and whatnot. And what that temple used to have was about 1,000 priestess or harlots. They used to go and sleep with the congregation and say, "This is our form of worship. This is the way you worship Aphrodite. You sleep with a priest or priestess." It had the reputation that if you were to be called a Corinth, it was the biggest insult. If you were to be called a Corinthian woman, it's the same these days as being called the S word. Like being called a harlot, it's not something that you appreciate. Okay, that's the reputation that Corinth had. Now, Corinth was a city that St. Paul visited in his missionary journey, as you can see in Acts 18. He goes, he visits, he preaches, he converts, and then he leaves. And then this other Jewish Hellenist comes in who converted to Christianity. His name's Apollos. Goes in and preaches to them, and they all think is well and truly good. And then a few issues start to arise, as we see. There's the issue of division. Some people said, "Hey, I'm a follower of Paul." Some said, "I'm a follower of Apollos." Some said, "I'm a follower of neither." All right, I'm a follower of Christ. But usually you find that the ones that said, "I'm a follower of Christ," weren't really a follower of Christ. They were just saying, "Hey, I follow Jesus," but then don't do anything about it. They just don't want to be restricted to like people these days don't want to be restricted to a certain denomination because it means I have certain rules and certain things I have to do. That's what people back then used to do, saying, I don't follow Paul or Apollos, I follow Christ. And in following Christ, I do whatever the heck I want. Okay, because I'm free. There was the issue related to sex, as you saw in the video, and kind of blew my mind the first time I read Corinthians, is that there was a guy in the church having sleeping with his stepmom, and people in the church were saying, "Hey, this is fine. There's nothing wrong with this." And I think that's what ticked Paul even more. Not the fact of the action, but the fact that people in the church were promoting this and saying, "Yeah, this is completely fine." There was the issue of food. Okay, and you see that when we talk about the issue of food, and we'll get to it later, there wasn't actually an issue, but people made it an issue. There's the issue of the gatherings, and there's the issue of the resurrection. And there's a few things that they had an issue. Now, if you look at what the church fathers say, they generally say that there was a letter from the church in Corinth to St. Paul, but that letter has unfortunately been lost. We don't have access to it. But we know that it was probably a structured letter with a list of all the issues, because if you read the way Corinthians is structured, it is structured in a way where he's addressing issues. All right, it's not just a letter. He didn't send the letters like, "Hey, how you guys going? Make sure you do this." He's addressing certain issues. So he received word from the church in Corinth. There's other speculation that someone came to him and spoke to him, but the majority of the fathers said he probably received a letter that is now lost, that we don't have access to. But we can kind of assume what the letter's about based on what the letter to the Corinthians is about. So that's just a kind of general overview of what Corinth was like. Okay, and then the issue with the church, as we said, there was division in the church, but then the people inside the church started looking outside the church and adopting their views, their issues, their things. Okay, everybody outside, all these pagans, think it's fine to sleep around, and I'm a Christian, but by being a Christian, I've been made free. I can do whatever the heck I want. I'm going to do the same thing as them, which is contrary to what Christianity is, which is contrary to what St. Paul is teaching, right? He's saying you're supposed to be different to them, not the same as them. Don't use Christ as a way to justify your actions. Okay, and it's broken up into four parts. I'll kind of take a verse from, we won't pull it up, otherwise it'll take forever. I'll take a verse from each kind of section and then contemplate on that, and then hopefully we'll call it a day. So the first thing that we'll talk about is the division. The first thing that St. Paul addresses is the divisions, okay? In chapter 1, verse 12, he says, "Now I say this, that each of you says, I am of Paul, and I am of Apollos, or I am of Cephas, or I am of Christ." And like I said, the ones that said I am of Christ, not really of Christ. They just say they were. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you, or were you baptized in the name of Paul? I thank God that I baptized none of you except Cyprus and Gaius, lest anyone should say that I had baptized in my own name. Now here's St. Paul saying, I'm so happy I did not baptize any of you, which seems like a strange statement to say. Could you imagine the priest comes, Father Paula hasn't baptized anybody in his life, and is like, I am so happy I've never baptized anyone. It seems like a strange statement to say, right? But why was St. Paul saying this? St. Paul's saying this because I'm happy that I'm not actually a cause of your division. There's nothing that you can say that justifies the division that you're having in my name. Yeah? Because is Christ about division? No. All right, Christ is about the complete opposite, unity. So the fact that St. Paul saw these people using his name for division made him pretty upset, and he was kind of glad that it was unjustified. He didn't baptize anyone. I can't say anyone. Okay, and then where's the verse? Okay, and then sometimes we'll see this in our own service, where, I don't know, I teach Sunday school, so I'm going to use this as an example, but I'll give you an example of my dad who works in the kitchen as well, where people use service as a means for division. In Sunday school, I have a bunch of kids, and there's a bunch of other servants as well. And I'm not going to mention who it was, but there's a servant who the kids are generally drawn to. The kids are obsessed with them. Yeah, they all come to them, they all love them and whatnot. And that person had other servants coming up to them, and it's like, hey, why do all the kids love you? Like, stop. And it's just like, why? Okay, and that servant was like, look, it's not about me. If the kids love me, they love me. If they don't love me, they don't love me. It's not about that at all. Yeah, if a kid comes and spits in my face, I'm just as happy as if a kid loves me. Like, I'm not here to serve these kids, I'm here to serve Christ. So in serving Christ, if these kids become obsessed with me, that's fine. If these kids decide to hate me because they're not happy with the truth that I'm preaching, that's fine. But his point his like intention wasn't to get these kids to love him to begin with. That it's beautiful that it happened. Don't get it like he's not upset about it, but it's not the purpose. And the fact that like this was kind of causing division between him and the other servants was something that was kind of confusing to him and to myself. It's like, why are you getting upset about his service? Yeah. Why am I using this as a reason for division when this is supposed to be a reason of unity? Yes, that servant is well loved. Maybe look at them and say, okay, what are they doing that's well, and try to adopt that rather than it's not a competition. Yeah, and St. Paul says it's not a competition. Right. I planted, Apollos watered, but Christ gave the increase. So who's the reason for the increase? Christ. Yes, I'm doing my part. I've planted the seed. And yes, I've done my part. I've watered the seed. But if I plant and I water and God does not decide to give increase, God doesn't decide to give increase. I went to, I don't know if you guys know St. Greg's. It used to be an agricultural school. Now it's become more of a rugby school. But as part of food tech in year 7 8, we had to plant veggies. And everybody planted in the same soil. And everybody watered the same amount because we literally only went during our food tech classes and watered. And we got given the same bucket of water, the same amount of water to water. Okay, sorry, I forgot the word. So we all planted, we all watered the exact same. I don't think anybody was more of an expert. This is the first time I've ever planted a carrot in my life. And then at the end of the term, we came and we plucked everything out, and some carrots were fantastic, and some were just some quality creatures. Okay, we had some cabbages that came out soggy, and some lettuces and cabbages that came out good. Okay, and it's the same. Okay, we've all planted, we've all watered. What have we done differently? Nothing. So why were some successful and some not? If you ask a scientist or an actual agriculturalist, they'll probably give you scientific reasons for it. But just from my limited understanding is that God gave the increase. Some were blessed and some weren't. And what difference does it make? Okay? And the issue with this is that sometimes we like to judge ourselves based on our fruits. Yeah? Whereas if you look throughout the preachings of Paul, he always talks about works rather than fruits. Yeah, when it's talking about service, it's the works of my service. What effort have I put in? Not what fruits have I gotten. When I am judged, I'm based on the work that I put into my service, not just the fruits. If I've worked twice as much and only produced half the amount of fruits, that's fine, because who provides the fruits? That's God. Okay, that doesn't make me a better servant. What makes me the better servant is the work that I put in. Okay, but as long as our work is for Christ and not just work for the sake of work, just as long as it's not work for the sake of myself. If I'm working for the gospel, if I'm working for Christ, that's what counts. Don't count your fruits. Any questions about that before I move on to the next section? Okay. Now the next section that he kind of divides up the book is chapters 5 to 7, which is about sex. I'm not going to go too much into it, but obviously we know there's things that we should and shouldn't do. And yeah, there's things that are pleasing towards God and the things that are not pleasing towards God. And if you want to look into it, go read. But it's kind of straightforward there. Okay. Now the next issue that he talks about is food. And when he talks about food, he's not talking about food as the issue that I have, which is obesity. But in terms of food offered up to altars, so up to not altars, what are they called? Idols. Food offered up to idols. If you look at Daniel, where Daniel and the 3 sent youth, Azariah, Mishael, and Abednego, they get captured, and Nebuchadnezzar comes up to them, or the servant, the eunuch of Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, I got food for you, you need to eat of this. And as per the Jewish tradition, any food offered up to idols was defiled. Any food offered up to idols, they could not touch. Okay? Then Christ comes along and says, hey, don't worry about that anymore. Okay, I've redeemed you, I've saved you. It is not, he says it's not what enters the mouth that defiles a man, but what proceeds. What proceeds from the mouth. Why? Because what proceeds from my mouth is what's coming from my heart. What enters my mouth is food. Okay, my dad, when he talks about food, he's from Upper Egypt. He was kind of raised poor. Every time we talk about food, it's like, Dad, you want good food? It's your birthday, let's go out to eat, whatever. He's like, bro, Lee, I find it bad. Okay. Like, and just, I think in Arabic you can visualize afanatabat, what that means. But pretty much, like translation, it's just mush in your stomach. Like regardless of what goes in, it all goes, like it all gets processed the same and all goes out the same. Okay, what difference does it make? Like afanatabat, not the same context that St. Paul was using it as, but same kind of message. Whereas this food, what goes in doesn't matter. However, if I'm going to do something that causes me to that causes someone else to stumble, then I don't do it. Yeah? If I'm going to eat food offered up to idols, knowing that it's okay, because Christ said it's okay, St. Paul said it's okay, but I see my fellow brother is going to be stumbled because of it, I don't do it. Okay, and that goes beyond food as well. I hear this at St. Barbara's every year we have a servants meeting to allocate services, and there's always the same dot point that has a half an hour discussion, which is no drinking, no alcohol. I'm not going to tell you my opinion on the matter, but let's say you decide in your own conscience that drinking alcohol is completely fine. Okay, that's fine. Okay, there's other churches that say alcohol is fine as well. Just the issue is getting drunk. Okay, we as a Coptic church have been kind of influenced by the Arab culture. And we kind of draw the line at 0. If you speak to a priest, they'll tell you don't drink at all. But let's say I decide I'm okay, I'm going to drink. If I know that the person next to me is going to stumble because of my drink, then I'm not going to do it. If I know that I'm holding a glass of wine or a glass of beer at a party, I'm going to get a photo taken of me, and that photo is going to potentially make it onto social media, and my kids are going to see it, then I don't do it. Okay, why? I might think drinking is okay, and drinking for you might be okay between you and your own conscience, and I'm not going to judge there. But if it's going to cause someone else to stumble, do I do it? No. Okay, and it's one of those things where you'll see, well, I've stumbled in a few times, and I see other people stumble in, is that they look at what their actions and say, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Okay, I'm going to do me, and it doesn't matter what everybody else thinks. And all for it, go do you, but don't cause anybody else to stumble. Okay, now if you're going to do you out of spite, out of hatred, and cause someone else to stumble, then St. Paul's not going to be too happy with you, and neither will Christ. Okay, because he tells us that if it causes someone else to stumble, I don't do it. If it causes someone else to falter along the way, I don't do it. Okay? Any questions about that? No? All right, so just before I move on, and why do I need to make sure that I don't cause anybody else to stumble? Why does St. Paul tell us I need to look out for my fellow men? If I cause them to stumble, it's not a good thing. This is love. The reason I don't cause other people to stumble is because I love them. And if I genuinely love other people, I want to see them saved as well as myself saved. Okay, and if I know I'm going to do something, that's right. I'm not like, if you're doing something that is right, that is okay, that is fine. But you know someone else is going to judge you for it. You know someone else is going to stumble because of it. Don't do it because, don't do it because you're going to cause them to stumble. And if you cause them to stumble, that's not love. I guess if you cause someone to stumble accidentally and unintentionally, that's completely fine. Okay, that's not, but it's the intention. If I know I'm going to eat of this, or if I know I'm going to drink this alcohol, or I know I'm going to go to this certain location, and I'm okay with it, my conscience is clear, but I know other people stumble because of me, I don't do it because of love. Okay, and that brings us to the next section, which is gatherings. If you hear in, I keep looking at the screen because I think this is reflected, but it's not. If you hear that the way church gatherings used to happen in Corinth back at that time was very chaotic. And it's people speaking on top of the other. You had people like to take this verse out of context and say, women keep silent in the church, and say this is an attack on women's rights in the church. No, definitely not. It's just the women at that time were quite loud, to put it slightly. And from what Father Tadros Malati used to say is that they used to go out of their way to show their authority over everybody else in the church. Okay, because like I said, the biggest religion in there was the Temple of Aphrodite, who was a church of 1,000 priestesses that were not that great. And then they were kind of felt empowered by that. Okay, now nothing wrong with empowering women, but the way they were empowered was not the best thing. And they used to come into the church and say, look at me, I'm better than you and whatnot, and cause issues. So St. Paul shuts them down and says, no, okay? In church, it's about order. You had people speaking crazy languages and said, like, no, speak the language that people understand. All right, you're in Corinth, it's a Roman country, they're speaking Latin, speak Latin. You had people arguing on top of each other, or even just preaching. How some guy get up and preach, and someone else will cut them off, and someone else will cut them off, and someone else will cut them off. Why? Just to show that, hey, I know this stuff. I know all this. And I need to show everybody that I know this. Is that love? No. That's kind of like pride, saying, I know this. I need to let you know that I know this. I'm not trying to teach you. Okay, and St. Paul says, no, none of this. Okay, church is about order. He starts talking about the body, that we're all the body and different members of the body. He talks about love and unity through the one body of Christ. All right, and the last section, he talks about the resurrection, because there are people in there trying to preach that the resurrection didn't happen, or the resurrection is pointless. Is the resurrection pointless? Thank you for the answer. No. All right. The resurrection is not pointless, because if the resurrection didn't happen, then there's no reason for us to be in this church right now. If the resurrection is not real, then there's no point for me being here. Because the death of Christ is meaningless if there's no resurrection. The death of Christ is useless if there's no resurrection. Okay, but every year we come and we celebrate the resurrection. It's the biggest feast in our church, biggest out of the 7 major feasts, because without the resurrection, our faith is futile. So saying, if you're saying there's no resurrection, then why are you even here? I think I'll stop it there just because it's getting late and we've still got a Kahoot to do. Does anybody have any questions? No? All right, glory be to God forever. Amen. Just as we start the Kahoot is only, they put a limit on it, so it's limited to the 40 players. So the first 40 to get in will be the 40 to play. I think there's 2, 4. Actually, I don't think there's even 40 of us. So everybody will have the opportunity to play. Jump on, get your phones out. I'll set it up. You'll see the codes, and we'll get started from there.